Hey YouTube, we videoed this last night and ran out of sunlight, so half of my face was black because we had the yard light was on behind me. Anyway, I got 24 minutes, so I hope I get this done. Episode 24, chapter 21, and chapter 22 as a bonus because chapter 21 is short. Hi, lover.
You practicing?
Nope, I'm filming already.
Oh.
Can you see me okay?
Yeah. Let's do. There. We'll get you centered.
Okay. Trial by buffalo. I watched as that buffalo sniffed my sister. If he hooked her with even one horn, she would die before I could get her away from him. Suddenly, I had to pee. It ran down my legs. I'd never been that scared before. Taking care of Annie was my responsibility, and I was doing a terrible job of it. I ransacked my memories for any ideas on how to help me get her away from him. That beast towered taller than the well and taller than the outhouse. I threw my handful of weeds at that stinky monster's face. He moved off a few feet and started eating the weeds I'd thrown at him. Like an Independence Day explosion, my mind started working again. I knew this overgrown cow. I had fed him carrots with Emerald out to the gypsy camp. Racing back to the garden, I ripped out a skirt full of carrots. I dumped them in front of him. He grunted like he'd been starved for days. I grabbed Annie and raced for the root cellar. I didn't think he could follow us in there. I forgot how much he loved carrots. He ate those carrots and looked for more. I know he smelled the carrot scent on my hands and on my skirt. He plodded toward the root cellar, following us. Each step he took carried him yards closer to us. He stopped at the opening. He sniffed, took another step forward. His shoulders caught in the doorway, but he shoved on through. His big old hump caught on the opening at the top. Annie and I backed up more. We kept backing up. He kept fighting his way deeper into the root cellar. His big old hairy body blocked out most of the light. I took Annie deeper and deeper into the cave. I took her past the corner where Elmer and Pa had quit digging, and the cellar turned into a real cave. That buffalo bawled out an angry sound. I tucked Annie into a corner and found my basket. I pulled out Pa's spare pistol. I didn't want to kill that buffalo. I kept telling myself that. I didn't want to kill him. He was taller than a covered wagon. Emerald told me they bought him in Virginia. I don't know if that was true, but he wasn't the kind we grew here on the prairie. He was bigger, much bigger. I eased toward him. His bellowing got louder and louder. If I had any pee, it would have run down my legs again. He saw me. His head came up. He gouged a deep scar in the cave wall with his big old hooking horns. He hadn't been able to force his way all the way inside. His back feet were still outside. You need to back up. I knew if I shot him in here, the roof could fall in on Annie and me. Go back where you came from. He snorted and blew snot on the ground between us. 1 foot threw dirt up onto his belly and out behind him. He made that awful sound again. I screamed at him. He bellowed back, "Get out, get out, get out!" He strained and threw more dirt. I realized he was stuck. And because he was stuck in the doorway, Annie and me was stuck. He blocked the only opening. I cried. I had just gotten Ma back. I didn't even know if Pa was alive or dead. I hadn't seen Elmer since breakfast, and my brother just got skinnier every day. I was afraid that one day soon he'd dry up and blow away. Now I'd ruined our home by inviting this stupid buffalo in. I yelled at him like I had yelled at Mr. Kruger. Instead of a pair of tongs, I carried Pa's spare pistol. I aimed it at his head. Please don't make me kill you. He slung his head and slime flew every which way. I could see his muscles bunching, and he forced himself a few inches deeper into the cave. Oh, Lord. It was the only prayer I could think of at that moment. I checked to be sure there were bullets in every cylinder of the gun, and I took a second to thank Sam Colt for the valuable tool I held in my hands. I pointed the gun between the monster's eyes. He had a cowlick in the middle of his face. All the hair spun away from that one spot. I aimed at the center of it. Please, go away. Don't make me shoot you. He didn't listen. He even tried to hook me with one of his horns. That was the last straw. I'd heard that expression before, and now it finally made sense. Him trying to hook me didn't do any damage to me or to the cave, but it made me one tiny bit scareder. When I get scared, I get mad. Sometimes I cry. I threatened him. I warned you. He still didn't back up. So I shot him. A tiny drop of blood formed in the center of his whirl and fell on the floor. It splattered into 100 drops. He stood stock still forever. Then he moved toward me again. I jumped backwards, I fell, I rolled, and I scooted away from him as fast as I could. I jerked that pistol up again, but he was dead. Even dead, he still blocked the opening. I said that bad word again. I probably could have climbed and crawled my way out, but I didn't see anybody do it while holding on to Annie. I sat in that cave trying to keep her happy until it got dark. With nothing else to do, we laid ourselves down and went to sleep. Pinky! Ma screamed my name. Ma! I yelped back at her. Ma, he's blocking the door. I heard Elmer's voice then. He and Ma had their own little reunion without Annie and me. Hot tears ran down my face. Jealousy was so strong it made me ache, and it swelled all up inside of me. It didn't matter. Annie and I were still stuck in the cave, or in the root cellar, at least until somebody could drag that monster out the way. I cried myself to sleep again. I don't know how long I laid asleep on the floor. When I woke up, Elmer had a wet rag, and he wiped away my tears, gentle-like. Come on back. You can do it. We all need you. Come on back. He whispered the words over and over. Pinky, you have to be okay. I need you. I'm okay. You think you are. Your ears leaked blood. Ma says you might have damaged your brain when you shot that buffalo. He's big, isn't he? Good girl. He laughed for just a second, and then he started crying. I'm so glad you're not dead. We got Mr. Harkin's horses and had to drag him out by the legs. Annie? I couldn't see anything except a gentle glow where Elmer's face was. I took her out to Ma. That baby has your red-headed temper. She saw you laying there and threw a royal hissy fit trying to get to you. She finally wore herself out. She's hanging in that tree where you put her when you work in the garden. Long, slow minutes passed. Elmer started in, wiping away the blood that ran from my ears. Having to make our way without Ma and Pa made me grow up fast. It made Elmer quiet. I asked, Pa? I could hear and feel Elmer's silence speaking louder than his words, but I needed the words. I asked again, Pa? Ma doesn't know where he is. He should have gotten here when Ma did, or soon after. Is he dead? Elmer snorted, and then he laughed. I doubt it. Do you remember when he shot those rattlers? That snake struck at him, and he jumped in the air and shot it without getting bit. No, Pinks, I doubt anyone can outshoot our Pa. What if he was dry-gulched? Nope. Elmer made a noise then that would have got his ears boxed if he'd have made it to Pa. You know Pa's too savvy for that. He probably got some new information about where Old Man Gates is. He'd have gone tearing out after him for sure. My brother was right about Pa tracking down that Gates monster. I tried to nod, and I knocked myself out again. Chapter 22, Canning Buffalo. It takes more than 100 jars, more than 500 jars to can a buffalo. Lots more jars. Mrs. Ruth Ann and Mr. Meany Mustache came over and helped. She mostly sat in the shade and cut meat up into little pieces to fit it in the jars. Still, she helped. A bunch of it we salted and put in barrels. Mr. Mustache drove the wagon to town and got salt and jars and everything else that Mrs. Harkin said we needed. On one trip, he brought Mrs. Gosling and all the Gosling kids out too. Mrs. Gosling had Mr. Mustache use some of Elmer's house lumber and build a huge frame. Then she stretched out that buffalo hide. I never noticed before that she was an Indian. I could tell instantly she knew what she was doing. All of her kids helped. They had special scraping rocks that they used. I mostly sat in the shade and tried to keep an eye on Annie. Ma kept looking off down the road and over the hills, but Pa didn't make it home to help with the butchering of that carrot-loving monster. By the time my dizziness wore off, I'd been little more help than Annie had. Mr. Mustache tucked Annie into her pack and toted her around. I don't know why she loved him. When I tried to take her to feed her, she batted my hands away and told me, no, no, no. I could only laugh when she shook her little fat baby finger at me. Mr. Gosling showed up. Mrs. Gosling said our whole family could snuggle under that big buffalo hide to stay warm. I didn't care if I had to sleep cold all winter as long as Pa come home. Billy Joe McClendon showed up, and he could not believe his precious Annabelle Lee preferred Mr. Mustache to her own Pa. Billy Joe and Elmer and Adam built a smoking shed and made thousands of little strips of buffalo meat for jerky. Ma kept me close to her like she did when I tore up my hands and knees. When I tore up my hands and knees in Mr. Harkin's mine. Mrs. Harkin did not help at all other than to tell everybody what to do on account of she was taking care of baby Joe. The person who helped the most was Miss Letha Gates. She even hugged me for telling the sheriff about Rufus. My ears had quit bleeding, but it was late on the second day of canning buffalo before I was much good for anything. I scooted around in the garden pulling weeds and killing bugs. We had 17 of those big, ugly green worms on our tomato plants. If the tornado hadn't taken our chickens, I'd have given those ugly worms to them. I gave the crawlies to Buddy Bacon instead. I smiled when I realized there wasn't room in the smoking shed for Buddy. We'd have to keep him till next fall. On the third day of canning buffalo, Mr. Mustache and Mrs. Ruth Ann sat me between them in their wagon. They chatted on about everybody who'd helped with the buffalo and everything that had happened. And at one time, we had 15 pressure canners going at the same time. They must have brought out every single one of them that was in the county. That many cookers used a lot of firewood and kept the whole place hot. As we rattled along in that wagon, I finally asked, "Where do you live?" They both quit talking. Finally, he said, "We're living in our root cellar for now. Maybe next year we can rebuild the cabin. The storm took our house too." Mrs. Ruth whispered, "I just finished cleaning my kitchen when the storm took me, and it took our cabin." He finished, "We had been staying in town until someone told us that you kids were staying home alone. Of course, That person also told us that a cyclone had taken your folks. Mr. Kruger, he had to be the one. Nobody else called them cyclones. But I don't know where you lived before the storm. Halfway between Leakin Rock and Walsenburg, you turn south on the path that skirts the Kacharis River. We're 3 miles on down that road. Why are we headed this way? I live back there. You live way back there. We missed the turnoff for the Harkins house. Where are we going? Mr. Mustache gave me a quick little squeeze. We are headed to the river to see if you caught the catfish. And I really had. Mr. Mustache unhooked his team from his wagon and tied the fish rope onto the harness, dragging that river beast out of the river and up the hill near wore out his 2 horses. Getting it up the hill was only half of the work. We still had to get it into the wagon. He brought a mess of rope and pulleys that he called a block and a tackle. I saw him eyeing the branch where I tied off my swinging rope. He shook his head and looked how far it was from the ground to the bed of that wagon. Mr. Mustache, I can climb that tree if you need a rope tied off. I've been calling him Mr. Mustache so long I forgot that wasn't really his name. He looked at me all puzzled and then he laughed. Can you tie a knot that you can untie later? I'm too old to be falling out of trees. I assured him I could. I kicked off my boots and tucked my skirts up, and I monkeyed right up that tree. I had to dig my fingers into the little spaces in the bark. I nearly fell a couple of times. I wished I dared take off my dress, but that's not something an 8-year-old girl should do, nor the mayor. He tied his contraption onto a rope, and I pulled the whole mess up into the tree with me. I tied it off tight. He examined it from the ground and seemed satisfied. It was the most amazing thing. He tied the fish to one end of the rope, and then he pulled on the other end. The fish just lifted easy off the ground. He didn't even have to use his horses. I thought for a minute the fish was coming up into the tree to get me. I peered down into that fish's mouth. He could have swallowed me easy. He flipped and kicked and made the most awful sounds. I was afraid I was going to fall out of the tree and get swallowed. In spite of being afraid of him, I grinned big at that fish. I caught you fair and square. You can't go around scaring little girls anymore. Mr. Mustache looked up at me. You bested the biggest fish in Colorado, Miss Pinky. You most surely did. Thank you. I could not have done it alone. Shoot, I couldn't have done it alone either, he admitted. By the way, my name is Mr. Jarrett, but you can call me Mr. Mustache if you want to. Oh, I'd like that. I used to call you Meanie Mustache, but you're not really mean. He clicked his tongue and his ears got red. I was a mean old codger until I thought I'd lost my Ruth Ann in the storm. That put me on a whole different path. I didn't know how much I loved her till she was gone. I looked everywhere for her for days, I tell you. Then Doc Fishface sent word that she'd been found hurt. I cried all the way into town, afraid that she'd die before I got there to tell her I was sorry. His eyes filled with tears. He turned his head away so I'd not see him cry. I felt bad I made him get teary. My tummy felt sick, like when I have to throw up. Well, we didn't mean to find her. We were headed to the river to see if we caught the fish, but we didn't. We found a boy littler than me. He was dead. When we found Miss Ruth Ann, we thought the storm had killed her too. It's a good thing she made a noise. We'd might have buried her. Elmer ran to the Harkins house, and they brought the wagon. He wiped his eyes and thanked me again. I bet he kissed Miss Ruth Ann lots when nobody was looking. He tied off the rope and went for his horses. After hooking up his team, he backed that wagon under the fish and lowered it into the wagon. I stared in amazement at that block and tackle. It raised and lowered that fish easy peasy. Mrs. Ruth Ann and I helped where we could. We might have been more in the way than helpful, but Mr. Mustache only smiled at us. The monster's tail hung off the edge of the end of the wagon bed. A rope was through his mouth and out through his gills, and we kept him tied close to the front of the wagon. Mr. Mustache wet down a quilt and covered the fish to keep it alive longer. We raced back for our place. That fish made angry noises the whole way. I had planned to have Pa tie patches to the fish to drag it out of the river, but I also planned to take the thing to town to show it off. I mentioned showing it off and sharing it with the town, and Mrs. Ruth Ann clapped her hands and cheered. "That's a marvelous idea. Let's stop by your place and see who all wants to go with us." I think the storm messed up her voice because she didn't used to talk like that. Elmer came running down the road toward us when we came in so fast, he nearly got ran over. Mr. Mustache had him climb in the back with the fish and ride with us. The buffalo had been salted and stacked deep in the root cellar or hung in strips in the smoke shed. Our root cellar had never been so full. I bet we used up every empty jar in the county. Everyone followed us into town except the Harkins. They stayed behind to keep the fire burning in the smoke shed. Elmer, Adam, and Billy Joe ran ahead of the wagon carrying lanterns. It was the most exciting parade I'd ever seen. It was the only parade I ever been in. It would have been more fun if Pa had been there, and if the people in town hadn't mostly already gone to bed. We stopped by the saloon. A few sleepy horses were tied up out front. Elmer went inside. I wished they'd let me go in, but I'd have probably acted uppity. Sheriff Bustos warned me about that. Everybody warned me about that. Ma and Annie and I sat on the boardwalk in front of the saloon while the sleepy crowd gathered. They woke up quick enough when they saw that big catfish. Elmer pulled out his new boot knife to slice the thing open. A familiar rough voice said, "Let me get that, son." Ma screamed and shoved Annie at me. She hurled herself into Pa's arms. I never saw so much happy crying in my life. Even Elmer and Pa were blubbering. Mrs. Ruth Ann took Annie from me so that I could love on Pa too. Everyone jumped and danced and carried on like the ants in their pants went crazy. I felt warmth running down my face. I thought my eyes and my nose had started bleeding again. That made me cry harder. Emmy wrapped a blanket around me and tiptoed to kiss my cheek. "You grew," she accused. My smile nearly split my face. "We caught the fish. We caught my big fish. We can't go swimming though. The water is too cold." "I thought the storm had killed you. I asked Pa if you were alive, and he said, 'Good riddance.'" I hugged Emmy and admitted to her while I held on tight, "I still get a little dizzy sometimes. I shot the buffalo inside the root cellar. It made my ears bleed." I didn't know how the whole town could have been at our farm helping preserve that buffalo without Emmy knowing I had shot the buffalo. Turned out Mr. Kruger hadn't let him come, but Adam had sneaked off and come out there anyways. Adam got down on one knee in front of me. "Pinky, you shot the beast? I thought Mr. Harkins shot it for you." Elmer came in to stand by his friend. "You killed it? I've been telling everybody Mr. Harkins killed it. Ma said she helped deliver the baby. I thought they just traded help. Ma helped Mrs. Harkins while Mr. Harkins helped us." "No, that buffalo followed Annie and me into the cave. He tore up the doorway and he got stuck, and he wasn't stuck enough. He kept pushing further in. I had to shoot him. About then I noticed that everybody who looked in our wagon froze in place. Only a few brave souls touched the thing. Mr. Kruger showed up and he announced, "Upon my word, that is a whale." Uppity should have been one of my spelling words. "Don't be stupid," I scoffed. "Whales live in salt water. It has whiskers. It's a catfish." Mr. Kruger drew back his fist to knock the uppity out of me. I could have told him it wouldn't work. 4 of the cowboys from the saloon cocked their pistols and aimed them at him. Mr. Kruger's hands flew up high in the air. He backed away from me and away from our wagon. One of the cowboys laughed. "I remember you now, little girl. You the one dang near crippled him for pushing you last spring." I never laughed so hard as I did that day. A full-grown man getting bested by a little snip of a girl, and a redhead to boot. I saw you and that baby tumble down those stairs. I just knew that both of you were busted up bad. But somehow you kept her from getting hurt. Then the dafty handed you those tongs. I never imagined you could do anything with them besides drop them on your toes. Another cowboy took over the story. "I felt those tongs vibrate in my hands when you hit him. I bet that hurt worse than getting horse kicked." "I near wet myself laughing," a third cowboy said. "I was in town when your pa straightened him out that first time. You'd think he'd have learned." Mr. Mustache patted a couple of those cowboys on the shoulders. "Come with me to explain to him how cows eat cabbage in our town." "You don't have to do that," Pa called out. "Protecting my mayor is my duty and my responsibility." "And my pleasure," Mr. Mustache replied. He didn't sound at all pleased. Disgruntled had been one of Elmer's bonus words. Mr. Mustache sounded purely disgruntled. Those cowboys laughed and slapped each other on the back, and they crossed the street with him. They followed Mr. Kruger right into his store. I guessed Mr. Mustache felt like he needed to help us because we found Mrs. Ruth Ann during her bad time after the storm. Abigail slipped out of the store as those men were going in. She came to me and kissed both of my cheeks. "Are you sure you want to marry into this family?" I managed to smile a little. "Well, as long as I get you for a sister." "Oh." Abigail's mouth dropped open and a little tear ran out of one eye. "That is the sweetest thing." She pressed the box into my hands. "Open this when you get home." I laughed until I hurt the day you straightened out Pa last spring. I swear the whole town laughed at him. "Why'd you run off so fast? I wanted to give you this then. It's a brush and mirror. When I saw you had survived the storm, I figured the storm had stolen your brush." I didn't have time to thank her before Pa picked me up and squeezed me tight. "I love you. I told you if you did your best, it would be enough. I had no idea it would be gone so long. I didn't know your best would be this good." He shook, and so did I. I couldn't tell which tears were mine and which were his. Sweat and dirt caked his clothes. He stunk worse than Elmer when he skips his weekly bath. I didn't care. He smelled wonderful to me. He smelled like safe and home, and I held on as tight as I could. After a bit, he set me on the wagon seat. I'd never seen him cry before, but everybody in town did that day. Somebody handed Annie up to me, so I stretched myself out on the seat and laid Annie down on my tummy. We dozed while the whole town carried off chunks of my river monster. As we were leaving town, Mr. Kruger came running out to the wagon. Mr. Mustache pulled up on the reins. "Yes?" Mr. Mustache asked. "I'm sorry I hit and pushed the child." He could barely get the words out. He near choked himself getting them said. "Tell the child she's in the back." I watched his face turn nearly black with rage. "Tell her?" His voice got louder and higher. "Yeah, she's the one you hit. Tell her." Mr. Mustache's voice didn't leave any room for misunderstanding his meaning. None at all. Mr. Kruger stood still for nearly a minute. Mr. Mustache moved his hands to start the team, and Mr. Kruger spluttered out, "All right, I'll do it." He walked back to the tailgate and blurted out, "I'm sorry, I won't hit you again." "But I wasn't sitting at the tailgate." Mr. Mustache's voice cut through the night smoother than Ma's best knife through a coonskin. "I'll be in tomorrow to talk to you. Make sure you're at the store." "I'll have deliveries." He sounded uppity to me. "Not tomorrow you won't. Be at that store." Mr. Kruger's eyes found me. He cleared his throat and croaked, "Pinky, I won't hit you no more." I had angry moments in my life before that. This one was the angriest moment of them all. It felt like Mr. Kruger was to blame for Ma being stolen and Ma and Pa being gone so long. Even the tornado felt like it was Mr. Kruger's fault. I spoke up loud and clear. "That's right, you won't. 'Cause if you do, I'll shoot you right between the eyes just like I did that buffalo. I ain't fooling, and I ain't putting up with cowardice. Only a coward is as mean as you. If you do anything to keep Emmy and me from being friends, I'll be in to see you, and I won't need Mr. Jarrett or these cowboys to help." His face got white. "I promised not to hit you again." Pa shucked one of his pistols and handed it to me. I laid it across my legs. Then I raised one eyebrow and I said, "Your promises mean nothing. You should have apologized. Anyway, you heard me. I promise it all. You ain't never going to hit another woman or a child, or I'll come see you myself. You aren't keeping Emmy or Adam or Abigail from being our friends either." "Don't push me, child." He ground the words out from between his teeth. "Oh, I do. I push hard. If I shot you today, they'd probably elect me mayor tomorrow, and I'm just not ready for that yet. So don't you push me. I don't have to back up for your mean old self." Mr. Kruger shook his finger in my face. I wiggled Pa's pistol. "If I didn't love Emmy so much, I would shoot you right now." He turned white and took a sudden step backwards. Mr. Mustache clucked to his team, and I shot Mr. Kruger with my finger. He jerked as if I shot him with Pa's pistol. I smiled. Pa let me hold that pistol till we got home. We nailed that fish's head to the side of our tree. For now, that would have to do. I learned something important that day. Nothing makes you feel more powerful than having power that you refuse to use. Thank you so much for listening. If you like the story, please click like. I know it helps somehow with YouTube, but it helps me more. So Kevin and I just want you to know we love you, we appreciate you, but Jesus loves you more. Y'all have a blessed day.